of visitors. I recognize the member for Thunder Bay Atikokan.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to give a warm welcome to the President and CEO of Ontario Forest Industries Association, Mr. Ian Dunn. Welcome to the House.
Introduction of visitors. The member for Essex.
Speaker, this afternoon I'd like to welcome representatives of Together We Stand, Richard Seymour and Eleanor Miller.
Introduction of visitors. The member for Ajax.
Speaker, I just wanted to introduce my Paige's, her mom and her sister's name into the record is Niti Bhatia and Surya Bhatia.
Thank you. Introduction of visitors. The member for Oakville.
Pleasure to introduce a great friend of mine from Ottawa, Carlton Richard Stone.
Introduction of visitors. Reports by committees. I beg to inform the House that today the clerk received the report on intended appointments dated November 2nd, 2023 of the Standing Committee on Government Agencies. Pursuant to Standing Order 110F9, the report is deemed to be adopted by the House. Introduction of government bills. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to enact and amend various statutes, and that it be now read for the first time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bethlenfalvy has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to enact and amend various statutes, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to enact and amend various statutes. First reading of the bill, première lecture du projet de loi.
Would the Minister like to briefly explain his bill?
Speaker, I will elaborate in a ministerial statement shortly.
Look forward to it.
Introduction of government bills. Introduction of bills. I recognize the member for Toronto St. Paul's.
Thank you, Speaker. I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Updates to Training Requirements with Respect to Black, Indigenous, Racialized, Natural and Textured Hairstyles in the Film and Television and Live Entertainment Industries, and that it now be read the first time. Thank you, Speaker.
MPP Andrew has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Updates to Training Requirements with respect to Black, Indigenous, Racialized, Natural and Textured Hairstyles in the film and television and live entertainment industries, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Updates to Training Requirements with Respect to Black, Indigenous, Racialized, Natural and Textured Hairstyles in the Film and Television Live Entertainment Industries. First reading of the bill, première lecture du projet de loi.
And would the member for Toronto St. Paul's like to briefly explain her bill?
Thank you, Speaker. The bill enacts the Protecting Our Crowns training requirements with respect to Black, Indigenous, racialized, natural and textured hair types, Act 2023, which requires the Minister of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development to update training requirements respecting Black, Indigenous, racialized, natural and textured hair types for hairstylists who work in the film and television industry and live entertainment industry. This would make training on how to style and care for Black, Indigenous, racialized people's natural and textured hair types mandatory for all practicing hairstylists within the sector to protect the health and safety of performers, boost Ontario's economy, and work towards addressing racism in the province of Ontario. In short, Mr. Speaker, this bill would prevent the inequity of Black and other racialized performers already underpaid having to pay for their own hairstyles on set and backstage. I want to thank union leaders. I want to thank my constituency. I want to thank community members, hairstylists, performers, allies, store owners, and all of those who have made it possible to work with me on this piece of legislation.
And I'll remind members it's best just to read the explanatory note when you explain your bill. Introduction of bills. The member for Spadina, Fort York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Auditor General Act and the Members Integrity Act 1994, and that it now be read for the first time.
Mr. Glover has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Auditor General Act and Members Integrity Act 1994, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried. Carried. Would the member for Spadina, Fort York, care to briefly explain his bill?
Speaker.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Auditor General Act and Members Integrity Act 1994. First reading of the bill, première lecture de projet de loi.
I apologize. Would the member for Spadina, Fort York, like to briefly explain his bill now?
I certainly will now. Okay. Thank you. The bill amends the Auditor General Act, subsection 10(1) of the Act is reenacted to provide that the duty to furnish the information applies to documents and information that are otherwise confidential or subject to certain privileged rights. Subsection 10(2) of the Act is also reenacted to provide the Auditor General's right to access information applies despite other rights of privacy, confidentiality, and privilege. The bill also amends the Members Integrity Act 1994, Clause A of the definition of family in Section 1 of the Act is amended to include adult children, siblings, and parents. Section 2 is reenacted to provide that a member of the Assembly shall not make a decision or participate in making a decision that would lead to the reasonable perception that there is an opportunity to further the member's private interest or improperly to further another person's private interest. The bill adds Section 6.1, which provides that no member of the Assembly shall, in the exercise of an official power, duty, or function, give preferential treatment to any person or organization based on the identity of the person or organization. Section 31 of the Act is amended to allow the Commissioner to conduct an inquiry if the Commissioner determines it appropriate to do so, even in the absence of a referral from a member of the Assembly or Executive Council. At any time before the conclusion of the inquiry, the Commissioner may expand the scope of the inquiry if the Commissioner determines it is appropriate to do so.
Thank you. Introduction of bills. Statements by the Ministry. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Speaker.
If you can indulge me for a second. This might be a little bit tough to get through, but I just want to give a shout-out to my mother, who came here in 1944, left Budapest with her family, war-torn Europe, and made her way to Canada at such a young age with her family. She's battling pancreatic cancer. She'll be watching right now. Get better, Mom. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. It gives me great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to rise today on behalf of the Premier and our government to deliver our 2023 Fall Economic Statement, Building a Stronger Ontario Together. J'ai l'immense plaisir.
It gives me great pleasure to rise today on behalf of the Premier and our government to deliver our 2023 Ontario Economic Outlook and Fiscal Review, Building a Strong Ontario Together.
Ontario, Mr. Speaker, is growing rapidly. Last year alone, 500,000 more people chose Ontario as their home. There are 4,400 more businesses in our province today than there were last year, representing over half the new businesses that open in the entire country. And these new businesses mean new jobs. In fact, 170,000 net new jobs since January, Mr. Speaker. While this is good news for Ontario, we cannot take this growth for granted. As I've said many times before, Ontario is not immune to the risk of the economic slowdown. High inflation and the Bank of Canada's rapid interest rate increases are weighing on Ontario's outlook for the remainder of the year and into next year. Russia's war on the Ukraine and the recent horrific terrorist attack against Israel means continued heightened geopolitical uncertainty. With these economic and geopolitical challenges, there comes a choice. We can go back to a time when manufacturing jobs left the province in droves, when gridlock brought our communities and our economy to a standstill, when workers worked harder and harder, but life became tougher and tougher. Or we can continue on our path, a path that involves creating better jobs and bigger paychecks, a path that is building infrastructure we need to serve a growing population, that is fiscally responsible, and that includes a path to balance the budget. Mr. Speaker, our path and our road ahead is clear. We must continue with our government's responsible, targeted approach. We must continue with our plan to build a strong Ontario. Nous devons poursuivre notre...
We must pursue our plan to build a strong Ontario, and we must do this together.
Mr. Speaker, we are attracting new jobs and new investments. We are building the critical infrastructure needed to support our growing communities. We are training workers to fill the jobs needed in key sectors like healthcare and the skilled trades. We are putting money back into the pockets of the people of Ontario during a time of high interest rates and high inflation. And we are providing better public supports and services for the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, due to a slowing economy impacting revenue and increasing our ability to respond to risks, our government is now projecting a $5.6 billion deficit in 23-24. And in 24-25, we are forecasting a deficit of $5.3 billion, followed by a balanced budget in 25-26. And as we deal with the uncertainty ahead, Mr. Speaker, our government will never hesitate to do what is necessary to support the people and businesses of Ontario. Face à l'incertitude qui nous...
As we deal with the uncertainty ahead, Mr. Speaker, our government will never hesitate to do what is necessary to support the people and businesses of our province.
Mr. Speaker, our government is building Ontario. It starts in the north, where we are unlocking the incredible potential of the critical minerals, and finally, building the roads to the Ring of Fire in partnership with Indigenous communities. Mr. Speaker, critical minerals are the key to positioning Ontario as a global economic powerhouse. ready to seize the electric vehicle revolution and energy transition and be a serious player amidst geopolitical change. And that's why I'm pleased to announce that we are proposing to enhance the Ontario-focused flow-through share tax credit to encourage more critical mineral exploration. Mr. Speaker, our story starts in the north, but it leads to the south, where we are connecting these critical minerals to our province's leading electric vehicle manufacturing sector. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's no secret that the previous government decimated manufacturing in Ontario. Jobs left the province in droves. Well, Mr. Speaker, under this government and this Premier, manufacturing is back in Ontario and it's stronger than ever. Over the last 3 years, our government has attracted more than $26 billion in transformative auto and electric vehicle battery-related investments to Ontario. From Algoma to Windsor. It's our member from Windsor there. Ontario is becoming the heartland of the electric vehicle and clean steel manufacturing revolution. D'Algoma à Windsor.
From Algoma to Windsor, Ontario is becoming the heartland of the electric vehicle and clean steel manufacturing revolution.
And Mr. Speaker, this is just the beginning. Our Ontario-made manufacturing investment tax credit is helping lower manufacturing costs, innovate, and maintain a competitive edge. And Mr. Speaker, to keep up the momentum, today, our government is providing $100 million in new funding to Invest Ontario to attract more investments and more jobs right here at home in Ontario. And we are supporting all of this by continuing to invest in Ontario's clean energy advantage. Mr. Speaker, all this growth means we need more infrastructure. We need more highways to transport the goods we are producing. We need more transit to get people to where they are going. We need more hospitals. We need more schools to serve our growing population. But a growing economy, Mr. Speaker, and population is not the only reason we need to build. After decades of previous governments saying no, we inherited an infrastructure deficit in this province, and that's why we are building Ontario. We are building more highways like Highway 13 and Bradford Bypass. We are investing in more transit like the Ontario Line and the Northlander. Across the province, we are building hospitals, long-term care homes, schools, and childcare spaces. But as hundreds of thousands of people move to Ontario each year, existing infrastructure is becoming more and more strained. And despite our historic and unprecedented $185 billion capital plan, Ontario must build even more. And Ontario taxpayers can't shoulder the costs alone. That's why I am pleased to announce that today our government is launching the Ontario Infrastructure Bank. Hear, hear. Monsieur le Président, je suis heureux.
Speaker, I'm delighted to announce that our government is launching the new Ontario Infrastructure Bank.
Of many other jurisdictions around the world with similar entities, the bank will attract trusted institutional investors to help finance essential infrastructure that would otherwise not get built. A new arm's-length agency, the bank, will leverage investments by public sector pension plans and other trusted institutional investors to help fund large-scale infrastructure projects right across the province. At the outset, the projects financed through this new agency will be focused on long-term care homes, energy infrastructure, affordable housing, municipal and community infrastructure, and yes, Mr. Speaker, transportation. You know, Canada is renowned for one of the strongest pension systems in the world, including what we call the Maple 8, the largest funds in Canada and some of the most influential investors in the world. And we've heard from these funds that they are looking for more opportunities to invest workers' savings in Canada and right here in Ontario. With the Ontario Infrastructure Bank, we're creating opportunities for these Canadian pension funds to seize our home field advantage and invest right here at home. Mr. Speaker, the federal government also has to do its part. We're calling on Ottawa to invest in a new next-generation infrastructure program that provides adequate funding to address the critical infrastructure needs of provinces and municipalities. But in the meantime, yes, I heard a clap. In the meantime, I'm announcing that we're investing $200 million over 3 years in a new Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund. The fund is another step to help unlock new housing opportunities by ensuring water infrastructure necessary is built for new housing development. And to the people of Ontario listening today, I want you to know that building a stronger Ontario together means that your government is working for you. Bâtir un Ontario fort.
Building a strong Ontario together means that your government is working for you.
To fill in-demand jobs, better public services for more people, and keeping costs down for you and your family. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken a lot about building the economy and infrastructure, as has the Premier, as has every one of my colleagues. But it's workers who are getting it done. And we are working for workers. We have invested over $1 billion so more people can get a head start. We are partnering with private sector unions to train people for in-demand careers. And Mr. Speaker, we are helping workers plan for their retirement. Target benefit pension plans are offered by unions and associations to ensure their members have a secure retirement. They are common for workers in the skilled trades. Now, Mr. Speaker, the previous government overlooked and undervalued target pension plans by refusing to put in place a permanent regulatory framework in place for these plans. Mr. Speaker, our government is changing that. We're proposing a much-needed new permanent framework for target benefit pension plans. The new framework will help to protect the security for retirement for our workers while making a career in the skilled trades even more attractive. While we are working to protect retirement securities of workers in the long run, we also acknowledge the significant impact of inflation on people today. When inflation began to rise globally, we acted quickly and early to put money back in people's pockets. We eliminated the license plate renewal fees and stickers, saving the average family $600 so far. We increased the minimum wage. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we temporarily cut the gas and fuel tax rates. Now, inflation remains elevated. People and businesses continue to feel the pinch, particularly as the federal carbon tax makes everyday life more expensive. That is why today we are proposing that the gas tax cut be extended to June 30th, 2024. And that way we can put more money back in the pockets of the people where it belongs. Mr. Speaker, growing communities need housing. Since last fall, we have been calling on the federal government to remove the HST builder's pay on new purpose-built rental housing. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to inform the House that the federal government has answered Ontario's call. And as we committed, our government is removing the provincial portion of the HST on these projects. By encouraging builders to build more rental units, our government is helping people in Ontario find and afford a place to live. Now, Mr. Speaker, as we help keep costs down for people, we are also providing more convenient and better services, like in health care. Through our actions, pharmacists can now prescribe treatment for 19 common minor ailments. And, Mr. Speaker, through the leadership of the Deputy Premier and Minister of Health, the wait list for surgeries has been reduced by more than 25,000 from the peak in March 2022. Wow. And beginning in the fall of 2024, women aged 40 to 49 will be able to self-refer for a mammogram to screen for breast cancer. Our government continues to build a more connected and convenient health care system for the people of Ontario. But let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, and to the people of Ontario, the road ahead will not be easy. The economic challenges on the horizon underscore the need to remain fiscally disciplined and responsible. And by maintaining our path to balance, that is what our government is doing. And, Mr. Speaker, we have seen what the people of Ontario can accomplish when we come together. Nous avons été témoins de ce que les
We've seen what the people of Ontario can accomplish when we come together.
We can overcome any obstacle. Together, we can face economic certainty. Together, we can build the critical infrastructure we need to support our growing communities. Mr. Speaker, we can build Ontario together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Statements by the ministry. Responses. I recognize the member for Waterloo.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to offer our genuine hope that your mom has a full recovery. I think that that's very important. But I will want to say this government continues to deliver one disappointment after another. The people of this province are facing extremely tough times, Speaker, and it seems to me everyone but this government understands that these are extraordinary times. Cost of living is through the roof. The cost of living has been going up and up and up, and rent and housing prices are simply out of control. Ontarians are fed up. And they're stressed and they're worried, and this government just doesn't seem to get that. They're so preoccupied with making their insider land speculator friends richer, they're simply not able to see how hard people have it right now. Just last week in this House, Teresa, 92 years old, being rent-evicted, considering medically assisted and dying. Terrible. Those are real people with real issues, and this government is making a choice not to make her life easier. They're making it harder. During economically harsh times like these, we wanted to see more from today's fall economic statement, but it delivered absolutely nothing to shift away from the status quo. All the people of this province got today was ordinary and bland. Nothing in today's statement met people where they're at. Nothing spoke to the struggles of the people of this province, and ultimately nothing meaningful to allay their concerns and win back the trust this government has eroded over the past 5 years. And while we managed our expectations, people thought that this government would recognize that keeping people housed in rental units during a housing crisis should be prioritized. Did this government listen to that? We've been calling on this government to reverse the rent control that they removed. That decision has hurt so many people in this province. Housing costs continue to be the biggest drivers of affordability in this province. More than ever, in fact, rent control is a step that they can take right now, today, to help Ontarians. Yeah. But no, this government did not choose to do that. People are struggling with high grocery costs, and while CEOs rake in billions, this government is not doing a thing to tackle price gouging. In fact, you have a bill before us which misses the mark entirely. I mean, housing and food costs are the cost drivers for Ontarians right now. And this government couldn't even mention the word farmer in the entire nearly 200 pages report. Wow. Farmers are an important part of the economy in the province of Ontario. This is certainly not a government that's making life easier. In fact, it's really shocking, it is really shocking, Speaker, that the government has made a choice to not invest in critical services, but they are bloating up their contingency fund to the tune of $5.7 billion in the face of emergency room closures, in the face of a child care crisis, autism, I mean, you name it, emergency offloads for ambulances. A fiscally responsible government would not hoard billions of dollars, while cities across the province are seeing days without any ambulances. We see historically long wait times at emergency rooms, the child care. Students, 4 to 5 students in a one-bedroom apartment, because they can't afford the rent. This is a big issue in Kitchener-Waterloo. The people of Ontario know that this government has been in the driver's seat for 5 years, and for 5 years they have actively chosen to help their insider friends over the people that were elected to serve. The contingency fund is downright irresponsible, hoarding money instead of investing in key critical services people rely on, like healthcare, nurses, PSWs, childcare workers. One quick example, 2.1 Ontarians do not have a doctor. The Ontario Medical Association has requested an investment in reducing administrative burden. That would free up 2,000 more doctors. 19 hours a week they spend on administrative duties instead of seeing patients. This is a solution right before you. That's right. So, Speaker, this government clearly is completely and utterly out of touch with the people of this province, and this is what we are faced with, even while an RCMP investigation is criminally investigating this government. Today's fall economic statement was an opportunity to win back trust, to see their struggles, and see the people that we serve. This government made a choice not to do that, but don't fear. The Ontario NDP is on your side. We see you, and we're going to keep fighting for you.
The member for Ottawa South has a point of order.
Yes, Speaker. A bank. Thank you.
Not a valid point of order. Next, we have motions. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Speaker, if you seek it, you'll find unanimous consent to move a motion without notice concerning the appointment of the next Financial Accountability Officer of Ontario.
Government House Leader is seeking the unanimous consent of the House to allow him to move a motion without notice with respect to the appointment of the next Financial Accountability Officer of the Province of Ontario. Agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I move that in accordance with subsection 2.2 of the Financial Accountability Officer Act 2013, SO is Statutes of Ontario, 2013, Chapter 4, Jeffrey Novak be appointed Financial Accountability Officer for a term of 5 years as set out in subsection 3.1 of the Act, commencing on November 3rd, 2023.
Mr. Calandra has moved that in accordance with subsection 2.2 of the Financial Accountability Officer Act 2013, SO 2013 C4, Jeffrey Novak be appointed Financial Accountability Officer for a term of 5 years, as set out in subsection 3.1 of the Act, commencing on November 3rd, 2023. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried. Motions. Petitions. I recognize the member for Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. This petition is entitled Support the Port Colborne Urgent Care. To the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas the Niagara Health System reduced overnight service hours at urgent care centres in Fort Erie and Port Colborne starting July 5th, 2023, whereas the current Niagara Health System restructuring plan approved by the Ontario Ministry of Health does not include Port Colborne Urgent Care Centre, creating inequity of healthcare services in South Niagara, whereas the NHS is already experiencing a 911 crisis in EMS, a shortage of beds, and unacceptable offloading delays in its emergency departments across the region, whereas the population in the Port Colborne Urgent Care catchment area is both aging and growing, whereas the Ontario Legislature passed Motion 47 from the 42nd Parliament by Niagara Centre Jeff Birch, MPP Jeff Birch, on April 13, 2022, to provide a firm funding commitment and clear timelines for capital and operational support of the Niagara Health System as part of an overall effort to serve the growing population of the region, increase hospital capacity, create jobs, and offer the important high-level frontline service the people of Niagara need. We, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly as follows: to work with the Ontario Ministry of Health and the Niagara Health System to ensure 24-hour services are maintained at the Port Colborne Urgent Care Centre. I fix my signature and send it to the clerk.
Thank you. Petitions. The member for Toronto St. Paul's.
Thank you, Speaker. This petition is titled To Raise Social Assistance Rates to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas Ontario's social assistance rates are well below Canada's official market basket measure poverty line and far from adequate to cover the rising costs of food and rent, $7.33 for individuals on OW and $13.08 for ODSP, whereas an open letter to the Premier and 2 Cabinet Ministers signed by over 230 organizations recommends that social assistance rates be at least doubled for both OW and ODSP, whereas small increases to ODSP have still left these citizens below the poverty line. Both they and those receiving the frozen OW rates are struggling to survive at this time of alarming inflation. Whereas the Government of Canada recognized in its SUR program that a basic income, quote-unquote, of $2,000 per month was the standard support required by individuals who lost their employment during the pandemic. We, the undersigned citizens of Ontario, petition the Legislative Assembly to double social assistance rates for OW, ODSP. I affixed my signature, and I thank all of those in St. Paul's for signing this, and I'll hand it over to Clara. Thank you.
Petitions. The member for Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. My petition titled Save the Welland Hospital. To the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas the current Niagara Health System restructuring plan approved by the Ontario Ministry of Health includes removal of the emergency department, emergency surgical services, and associated beds and ambulance service from the Welland Hospital site once the Niagara Falls site is complete, creating inequity of hospital and emergency service in the Niagara region and a significant negative impact on hospital and emergency outcomes for the citizens of Welland, Port Colborne, and all Niagara, whereas the NHS is already experiencing a 911 crisis in EMS, a shortage of beds, and unacceptable offloading delays in its emergency departments across the region, whereas the population in the Welland Hospital catchment area is both aging and growing, whereas the Ontario Legislature passed a motion by Niagara Centre MPP Jeff Birch on April 13, 2022 to include a full emergency department and associated beds in the rebuild of the Welland Hospital, we, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly as follows: to work with the Ontario Ministry of Health and the Niagara Health System to implement Motion 47 from the 42nd Parliament to maintain the Welland Hospital Emergency Department and adjust its hospital plan accordingly. And I fix my signature and send to the clerk.
Petitions. The member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Speaker. On behalf of my constituents in Parkdale High Park and citizens across Toronto and Ontario, I would like to table this petition titled No More Gas Plant Expansion. And it reads, to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas our planet is undergoing significant warming with adverse consequences for health, for agriculture, for infrastructure, and for our children's future. Whereas the costs of inaction are severe, such as extreme weather events causing flooding and drought. Whereas successive governments over the last 2 decades have expanded gas plants despite public pushback. Whereas Ontario must reduce our province's reliance on fossil fuels and instead invest in new renewable energy projects to ensure we meet our provincial climate targets. Therefore, we, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to stop expanding Ontario's gas plants and reliance on fossil fuels and invest rapidly in lower-cost, proven renewable energy and conservation technologies. I couldn't agree more. I will affix my signature. And I also want to give a special shout out to my constituent and climate activist, Rita Bijan, who's watching. Thank you.
Thank you. Petitions. Member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you, Speaker. This petition is entitled Fix WSIB Now. Whereas the purpose of workers' compensation is to provide income replacement and other benefits to workers or their survivors when workplace accidents and occupational diseases harm or kill workers, and whereas Section 43(4) of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act 1997 operates to deny benefits to permanently injured workers even when they do not actually have any new jobs and income, and whereas this statutory provision has caused unjust and irrational financial loss, hardship, and ruin to persons suffering from permanent disabilities, therefore, we, the undersigned residents of Ontario, call upon the Legislature of Ontario to support injured workers by adopting Bill 57, Respecting Injured Workers Act 2022, introduced December 7th by 2022 by Wayne Gates, NDP, MPP, Niagara Falls. And I'd like to thank the citizens of Thunder Bay for supporting this petition. I fully support it and will give it to Sanaya to take to the table.
Other petitions? I recognize the member for Toronto Centre.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm proud to present this petition on behalf of the good people of Toronto Centre to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas this government knew exactly what was coming with the Omicron wave. We all did, but they marched us right into it without preparing hospitals and long-term care homes, whereas hospitals are so understaffed and overrun that people are left to worry if they can get the care that they need, whereas frontline healthcare heroes are exhausted, run off their feet on every shift, getting sick at an alarming rate, and doing it all while being disrespected by the government. We, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to scrap Bill 124 and increase healthcare workers' wages, increase hospital funding that matches inflation, population, and the community's needs, give all workers 10 permanent paid sick days, expedite recognition of nursing credentials of 15,000 internationally trained nurses, create new jobs for late career and recently retired nurses in supervisory roles and mentorship roles, implement a funded return to nursing program to bring back the over 4,000 nurses who have been left the profession. Sorry, Speaker, I'm just not feeling well. I proudly affix my signature to this petition and send it back to the clerk's desk. Thank you very much.
Petitions. I recognize the member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you so much, Speaker. I have this petition here titled To Raise Social Assistance Rates, and it's been signed by constituents in many Conservative ridings, Burlington, Hamilton, Mississauga, Binbrook, Linden, and so many different areas, a lot of Conservative ridings. And it reads, to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas Ontario's social assistance rates are well below Canada's official market basket measure poverty line and woefully inadequate to cover the basic costs of food and rent, whereas individuals on Ontario Works program receive just $733 per month and individuals on Ontario Disability Support Program receive just $11.69 per month, only 41% and 65% of the poverty line, Whereas the Ontario government has not increased social assistance rates since 2018, and Canada's inflation rate in January 2022 was 5.1%, the highest rate in 30 years. Whereas the Government of Canada recognized through the CERB program that a basic income of $2,000 per month was the standard support required by individuals who lost their employment during the pandemic, we, the undersigned, citizens of Ontario, petitioned the Legislative Assembly to increase social assistance rates to the base of $2,000 per month for those on Ontario Works and to increase other programs accordingly. Thank you so much, Speaker.
Petitions. I recognize the member for Toronto Centre.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm proud to present this petition to the House on behalf of the residents of Toronto Centre. Petition to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas health care and support services are increasingly understaffed workplaces, and whereas health and care services rank second highest for lost time injuries, all amongst the sectors in Ontario, whereas complex care is increasingly prevalent with a growing and aging population, and whereas recipients of care prefer services outside of large institutions and close to or inside their homes, whether group homes, retirement homes, or other residential care facilities, and whereas personal support workers are the backbone of retirement homes and home and community care setting that deliver care for seniors, and whereas developmental service workers are the backbone of group homes and similar residential care facilities that deliver care for people with exceptionalities, and whereas bites, cuts, broken bones are all too common injuries when doing this work, and whereas all group home and residential care homes workers deserve workplace protections as we ask them to care for some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, whereas it is not currently mandatory for workers to provide WSIB protections to PSWs and DSWs, particularly in retirement homes and group homes where a majority of workers like them provide care, and whereas approximately 25% of health and care workers have no WSIB protections under the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act 1997, and whereas efforts to expand WSIB coverage to PSWs and DSWs and all workers like them have received yes votes from the members of all political parties represented in the legislature in the past, and we, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario as follows. Legislate or regulate an expansion of mandatory WSIB coverage to all health and care service workers in Ontario by categorizing all those who work in and operate a group home or residential care facility or home/community care, including retirement homes, rest homes, and senior citizens residents, as a Schedule I employer. I want to thank the good people of SEIU for canvassing and collecting the signatures for this petition. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Further petitions? I recognize the member for Toronto St. Paul's.
To the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. Whereas a growing number of people in Ontario suffering from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome have to seek out-of-country treatment at their own expense because doctors in Ontario don't have the knowledge or skills to understand EDS symptoms and perform the required delicate and complicated surgeries, whereas those EDS victims who can't afford the expensive treatment outside of Ontario are forced to suffer a deteriorating existence and risk irreversible tissue and nerve damage, whereas despite Ontario Ministry of Health claims that there are neurosurgeon doctors in Ontario who can perform surgeries on EDS patients when surgery is recommended, the Ontario referring physicians fail to identify any Ontario neurosurgeons willing or able to see and treat the patient. We, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario as follows. Require the Minister of Health to provide funding to hire at least one neurosurgeon who can and will perform neurosurgeries on EDS patients with equivalent or identical skills to the international EDS neurosurgeon specialists, including funding for a state-of-the-art operating room with diagnostic equipment for treatments for EDS patients, and meet the Canada's Health Act's requirement to afford equal access to medical treatment for patients regardless of their ability to pay for out-of-country services. I support the petition, thank my St. Paul's community for signing, and will hand it over to Anaya for tabling. Thank you.
For the petitions, I recognize the member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Speaker. I have this petition here titled "To Raise Social Assistance Rates," and it is signed by constituents of Perth Wellington, Oakville, and Hamilton Stony Creek. And it reads, to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas Ontario's social assistance rates are well below Canada's official market basket measure poverty line and far from adequate to cover the rising cost of food and rent, $733 for individuals on OW and 1227 for ODSP, whereas an open letter to the Premier and 2 cabinet ministers signed by over 230 organizations recommends that social assistance rates be doubled for both OW and ODSP, whereas the recent small budget increase of 5% for ODSP still leaves citizens well below the poverty line. Both they and those receiving the frozen OW rates are struggling to live in a time of alarming inflation, whereas the Government of Canada recognized in its CERB program that a basic income of $2,000 per month was the standard support required by individuals who lost their employment during the pandemic. We, the undersigned citizens of Ontario, petitioned the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to double social assistance rates for OW and ODSP. I couldn't agree more. We'll affix my signature to it. Thank you very much.
I recognize the member for Waterloo. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to correct my record. During my response to the fall economic statement, I said 2.1 Ontarians don't have a doctor. It's 2.1 million Ontarians don't have a doctor. Orders of the day. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think if you seek it, you'll find unanimous consent to see the clock at 6.
The House Leader is seeking consent to move the clock to 6 o'clock. Agreed? Agreed. Orders of the day.
Item number 69, private member's notice of motion number 67. Ms. Jammer.
No private members' public business having been moved, the House stands adjourned until Tuesday, November 14, 2023 at 3 p.m.